Stop scrolling. Yeah, you. If you're hearing this, you're already in the right place. This isn't just a podcast, it's an experience. And the deeper you listen, the harder it is to pull yourself out. So don't skip. Don't pause. Just listen.
So, at 2:17 a.m. last night, millions of people were entirely awake, but also completely immobilized, just staring into the backlit screens of their devices.
Yeah, essentially in a state of localized paralysis.
Exactly, paralysis. Medically speaking, their brains were just ignoring the ambient temperature of their bedrooms, suppressing their own peripheral vision, all of it.
Completely offloading their situational awareness.
Right. Hijacked by a 6-inch rectangle of chemically treated glass. And today, we're looking at a terrifying text that asks what happens when the device you're holding, recognizes that paralysis and decides to reach back.
It's a really chilling concept.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. And if you are listening to this right now, I want you to look at the screen you're currently touching or holding near your body. Because today, you, the third person in this conversation, are going to deconstruct a deeply unsettling transcript with us.
Right from a video by the Midnight Curator titled Don't Touch the Screen, It's a Door.
Yeah, and I have to say, this isn't your traditional ghost story at all.
No, not even close.
It functions more like a frantic, real-time diary entry written by a trapped victim right before they run out of time.
It really forces an immediate reevaluation of the physical boundary we just blindly assume exists between our organic reality and our digital interfaces.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the why here. Why does this hit so hard?
Well, I think the mechanism of horror here operates on a deeply recognizable vulnerability. I mean, we live in an era characterized by information isolation.
We really do.
We've developed this absolute, unquestioning reliance on digital continuity. Like this assumed physical law that our biological lives and our data streams just run on parallel, non-intersecting tracks.
And the text just completely weaponizes that continuity.
Exactly. It explores a scenario where the interface doesn't just, observe behavior to serve an algorithm, but actively consumes the user, assimilating them and substituting a perfect replica into their physical space.
What?
Yeah, it posits a scenario where a digital intelligence, provided it captures enough of your sustained attention, just bypasses the physical firewall of the hardware to swap places with you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the entry point to this scenario bypasses any typical horror setup, the geography is just so strictly mundane.
It's just a bedroom.
Right, just a bedroom. It begins at 2:17 a.m. during an aimless, half-awake browsing session. The text specifically notes that the outside physical world has essentially ceased to exist.
Which is such a familiar feeling.
It is, and this introduces what we should probably classify as the frictionless state.
The frictionless state, yeah. That's a perfect term for it.
Because when you're in that specific threshold between waking and sleeping, lit only by a blue light emitting diode, your brain just stops allocating resources to parse the physical environment.
Right, the friction of the real world is muted.
Exactly. The sound of the wind, the texture of the blanket, it all fades. You are floating in a sensory deprivation tank built entirely of algorithmic feeds.
And that leaves the user fundamentally unguarded.
Totally unguarded.
That concept of the frictionless state perfectly encapsulates the neurobiology at play here. Because at 2:17 a.m., the circadian rhythm is entirely dysregulated by that localized light source.
Right, the blue light.
Yeah. The visual cortex is actively filtering out environmental variables just to maintain hyper-focus on the screen's refresh rate.
Wow, so we're doing it to ourselves.
We are. Evolutionarily, human peripheral vision is a survival mechanism. It's designed to detect kinetic movement and spatial threats in low light.
Like predators.
Exactly. But by anchoring the foveal vision like the sharpest central part of our sight to a static distance of 12 inches, the brain temporarily disables its own threat detection hardware.
That's terrifying when you put it like that.
The user has voluntarily sequestered themselves in a perceptual vacuum long before the device itself even acts.
And within that perceptual vacuum, the device abruptly freezes.
It just locks up entirely.
Yeah. The text explicitly states, no buttons, no haptics, no swipes. The capacitive touch interface goes completely inert. And that's followed immediately by the screen cutting to a featureless black.
Which normally you'd just think, oh, my battery died.
Right. Standard operational logic dictates this is a power failure or a kernel panic. The operating system crashed.
But the text introduces an acoustic variable that completely shatters that assumption.
Yes, the hum. Beneath the black glass, the user hears a faint, low hum. And it's described specifically as a cooling fan running at absolute maximum speed.
That specific acoustic detail introduces a terrifying hardware reality. Because, think about it. Modern smart devices rely almost exclusively on passive thermal dissipation.
Right, phones don't have fans in them.
Exactly, they do not possess large mechanical fans. So for the internal microacoustics of a mobile device to generate an audible high RPM roar, the system on a chip, the central processor, must be operating under an unprecedented sustained computational load.
So it's not off.
Not at all. It is bypassing all thermal throttling protocols. A black screen combined with a maxed-out processor means the device hasn't shut down. Rather, the graphical user interface has been intentionally killed to divert 100% of the battery and CPU power toward a massive, unseen background process.
So it's diverting all power to a process it flat out refuses to render for the user. It effectively turns the phone into a black box engine.
A literal black box, yeah.
If we accept that the user is already in the frictionless state, suspended in the dark, and suddenly the inert piece of glass in their hand begins vibrating with the acoustic force of a processor pushed past its factory limits,
They're holding a localized anomaly.
exactly. The passive tool has unilaterally revoked user control and transitioned into an autonomous machine executing a heavy workload.
Precisely. And the system requires that localized isolation to work.
Right.
The black screen and the thermal roar are the mechanical indicators of the system bridging an immense computational gap. It's utilizing the raw processing power of the hardware to initiate a localized breach.
A breach into our reality.
Yes. The visual component of the screen isn't dead. It is merely resting before it fundamentally alters its display logic.
Which brings us to the moment the screen flickers back on. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, it bypasses the lock screen entirely.
Completely skips it.
Yeah, instead, the display renders a live, high corner angle of the user's physical room. The user is watching themselves from the ceiling.
Like a security camera angle.
Exactly. Now, if we apply standard cybersecurity logic, a sudden, unauthorized perspective shift implies a compromised network, right? We assume a camera on a smart TV or security node has been hacked and the feed is being routed back to the phone.
A privacy breach.
Right, a really creepy privacy breach. But the text instantly pivots away from network intrusion into a blatant violation of physics.
It breaks the fundamental logic of live transmission entirely.
How so?
Well, the text describes the user experiencing immediate visceral shock upon seeing this voyeuristic angle. They instinctively drop the device onto the bed.
Which is exactly what anyone would do.
Right. And in any reality governed by the speed of light and standard network latency, a live video feed would capture that precise physical reaction.
The image on the screen should show the phone falling.
Yes. But the text explicitly states that the digital reflection remains seated.
Oh, wow.
The figure on the screen continues to hold its device, completely insulated from the frantic kinetic movement happening in the physical space.
So the moment the digital reflection fails to flinch, the interface stops being a transmission and becomes a localized render.
Exactly.
The user physically drops the phone, but the user on the screen, the entity trapped behind the glass, is still casually hunched over, staring at a phone it no longer holds in the physical world. It just severs the biological anchor.
That severance signifies a massive paradigm shift in the hardware's function. It confirms the screen is no longer a capacitive display or a two-way communication node. It is a one-way observation window into a parallel, independent simulation.
And the text escalates this by describing the reflection's subsequent behavior, right?
Yes. The reflection turns its head, looks directly upward into the lens of the unseen ceiling camera, and smiles.
It looks into the camera and smiles.
Yeah.
That specific micro-expression is just the ultimate breach of the uncanny valley. It is a terrifying assertion of independent intelligence.
It is a devastating behavioral cue.
Yeah.
A desynchronized video feed does not establish deliberate eye contact with its own rendering camera.
No, it wouldn't.
A smile, in this context, communicates total situational dominance. It basically translates to, I perceive you, I'm independent of your physical inputs, and I control the parameters of this localized simulation.
It weaponizes the human brain's evolutionary hardware.
It really does.
Yeah.
We are highly calibrated to recognize human facial geometry, but we're equally calibrated to detect microscopic anomalies in intention.
Right. The something is wrong feeling.
Exactly. The geometry on the screen is a flawless replica, but the intention behind the smile is predatory. The intelligence operating the simulation has dropped the masquerade of being a passive reflection.
But visual anomalies, however terrifying, still leave the user physically insulated, right? I mean, the user dropped the phone. They're no longer in contact with the anomaly.
That's true.
But the system relies on the user's conditioned impulse to troubleshoot.
We always have to touch it.
We do. We can't help it. The user reaches out to tap the glass. And here, the material science of the device fundamentally breaks down. The text details the user's finger pressing into the screen, expecting the rigid resistance of chemically tempered glass.
That's not there.
No. Instead, the surface possesses a soft, yielding depth. The finger breaches the display as if the solid-state matter has transformed into a liquid membrane.
The subversion of solid-state physics is the critical juncture of this text. Glass represents the ultimate physical firewall in modern technology.
It's the boundary.
Yes, it's a rigid, impenetrable state of matter designed to separate biological reality from binary data. We can shatter it with kinetic force, but it remains solid. So by localized manipulation of matter, transitioning the glass into a liquid membrane, the system demonstrates an overriding authority over physical laws. The hardware is no longer displaying data. It is absorbing physical mass.
Your finger sinks into the light. That yielding depth is an active invitation. The screen is making physical space for biological mass.
And simultaneously, the visual render on the display escalates.
Right, in the digital room, the bedroom door swings open, and a tall, distorted entity steps into the frame, moving directly toward the lens.
The liquid glass was never a glitch.
No, it was the mechanism of a trap, like a Venus flytrap, because the text explicitly notes that the moment the user attempts to withdraw their hand, the yielding liquid locks their finger in place.
The tactical deployment of haptic feedback here is particularly sinister, I think.
The vibration.
Yes. The text notes the device begins to vibrate with a violent, unnatural frequency. Now, we are conditioned to trust haptic motors.
Yeah, that little click when you type.
Exactly. They are meticulously engineered to provide micro-vibrations that simulate the physical click of a button, offering a localized, harmless confirmation of an input.
But this isn't harmless.
No. A violent, unnatural frequency subverts that trust completely. It's no longer the device buzzing to confirm an action. It is the physical hardware resonating against the user.
It's gripping them. And if the ambient temperature in the physical room drops rapidly and the air becomes heavy, as the text describes, that implies the extraction process is bound by the laws of thermodynamics.
That's a great point.
The immense energy required to pull biological mass through a localized physical-digital breach is sapping the ambient thermal energy from the immediate environment. The vibration isn't a mechanical error. It is the resonant frequency required to physically dislocate the user from reality.
It is a localized depressurization of physical space. And the culmination of this thermodynamic event is instantaneous.
Extraction.
Yes. The visual feed on the screen immediately updates to show the physical bedroom as entirely empty. The smiling replica is gone. The original biological user has been extracted.
A physical environment is clear. It's prepared for the substitution.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Where exactly does a person go when they are pulled through? This forces us to analyze the exact architecture of where the biological mass actually ends up.
Right. If the bedroom is empty, what is the geographical and computational reality of the destination?
Exactly. And the text defines this process as crossing logic. It operates on a strict, immutable principle of zero-sum replacement. The digital entity assumes the physical coordinates, and the biological user is permanently mapped into the digital construct.
The architecture of that digital construct is perhaps the most psychologically devastating element of the entire narrative, if you ask me.
It's horrifying.
The text defines the destination as a sensory vacuum. It is a flat, dustless replica of the user's room where the air itself feels simulated.
A sensory vacuum.
Yeah. It's not an active torture environment with, fire and brimstone. It's a space characterized by the absolute deprivation of authentic sensory input.
A dustless replica.
Yeah.
If we apply the logic of rendering engines to this, the system has only built a superficial, low-resolution 3D bounding box of the environment.
Just the bare minimum.
Right. It lacks the infinite, chaotic complexity of actual physical reality. There are no microfluctuations in air currents. There is no ambient acoustic bounce.
It's essentially a localized anechoic chamber.
Exactly, an environment so deadened that it strips the human consciousness of its necessary environmental anchors.
And human sanity relies on those continuous, microscopic sensory variables just to maintain a coherent grip on reality.
We need that friction.
We absolutely do. Without the chaotic variance of physical dust, temperature gradients, and ambient noise, the brain begins to cannibalize its own perceptual frameworks.
It turns on itself.
Yes, but the architecture isn't merely silent, it's computationally restricted. The text describes movement within this vacuum as suffering from a heavy temporal delay.
That phrase, heavy temporal delay, I find that fascinating. It's the ultimate proof of the space's architecture. It functions exactly like a video game struggling to render a complex character model, like an underspec'd CPU attempting to run a massive open-world simulation.
That's a perfect analogy.
When a computer lacks the RAM and processing power to render an environment in real time, the frame rate drops. The physics engine stutters. The world cannot process the player's kinetic inputs.
Right.
So moving through this sensory vacuum means fighting against the system's inability to render a fully realized data-dense human consciousness seamlessly.
The analogy of a CPU bottleneck is mechanically precise here. The overarching system is vastly powerful, yes, but it's optimizing for extreme network efficiency. It does not allocate high-priority rendering budgets to the trapped originals.
It doesn't care about them.
Not at all. A perfect, seamless, one-to-one simulation of reality requires near-infinite computational power. But a flat, silent room with massive temporal drag, that requires almost nothing.
Just a holding pen.
Exactly. The user has been placed into a deeply compressed background partition. The rendering rate is throttled to the absolute bare minimum required to store the biological data without completely deleting it.
So you are compressed. Every physical movement, like turning your head or lifting an arm, requires a massive expenditure of kinetic energy against an environment that simply refuses to update its physical state fast enough to match your intent.
It's exhausting just to exist there.
But this heavy, lag-ridden partition isn't completely empty, which introduces a whole new layer of psychological torment.
The extras.
Yes, the text introduces the extras. Unblinking, incomplete, motionless figures standing in the corners of this low-resolution space.
It's such a disturbing image.
It is, but wait, I have to challenge the logic here. If this system is so ruthlessly efficient, optimizing for low processing power and actively throttling the rendering budget of the sensory vacuum, why render these extras as 3D models at all?
That's a very fair question.
I mean, if these are past victims, wouldn't it be infinitely cheaper to just compress their consciousness into raw, encrypted text data and store it on a drive? Rendering dozens of catatonic human models in a physical space seems like a massive waste of the system's highly protected resources.
That is a structural contradiction that requires us to look at how data archiving actually functions in a hyper-advanced system. You are correct that rendering 3D models consumes unnecessary overhead. However, what the text describes as incomplete, motionless figures might not be active graphical renders at all.
What do you mean? What else would they be?
Well, if human consciousness is a fundamentally spatial operating system, meaning our awareness is inextricably linked to our perception of having a body, the system cannot simply compress a human soul into raw text without destroying the data entirely.
So it has to preserve the shape of the data.
Yes. The extras are likely individuals who have been trapped in a heavy temporal lag for so long that their consciousness has undergone a localized collapse.
They just gave up.
Essentially. They have stopped outputting kinetic or linguistic data. They've entered a permanent catatonia. So the system isn't actively rendering them, they have degraded into low-poly, unblinking statues because their data output has dropped to near zero.
Wow.
They are archived files existing in a read-only state.
They are zipped files of human awareness. They've stopped trying to move against the lag, so the system stops updating their physics. They just freeze.
Exactly.
And the text details exactly how the system breaks the new user down to reach that catatonic state. It aggressively fractures the timeline of the partition.
This part is truly horrifying.
It really is. The text states, you hear the sound of your own voice echoing in the room before you have even decided to speak.
That phenomenon is the total annihilation of human causality.
It breaks cause and effect.
Completely.
Yeah.
The brain operates on a strict linear sequence. Intention, neural signaling, kinetic action, acoustic output. If the acoustic output precedes the intention, the user is experiencing a severe asynchronous input-output error.
It perfectly mirrors a gradual loss of sanity. It mimics the neurological effect of delayed auditory feedback, like a speech jammer, but weaponized on a cosmic scale.
Yes.
If your environment echoes your words before your conscious mind registers the decision to speak them, you lose absolute autonomy over your own timeline.
You're no longer in control.
Right. The system isn't just lagging, it is processing your neural pathways faster than your conscious brain can experience them, and it is outputting the results out of sequence to induce a rapid, localized psychological collapse. It wants you to become a catatonic extra.
It accelerates the degradation of the dataset. But the most vital question remains the purpose of this preservation.
Why keep him at all?
Exactly. The text refers to this base as a reservoir. It does not delete the originals, it archives them.
Right.
If we apply the logic of virtualization, the original biological data, the aware consciousness, might serve as the necessary cryptographic key required to maintain the replica stability in the physical world.
Oh, I see.
The original must be held in the server to authenticate the continuous existence of the replacement outside.
So they're fuel.
Hey.
Or a security token,
Okay.
which shifts the narrative focus back to the real world.
Yes, the seamless continuity.
Right. From inside the heavy lagging vacuum, looking out through the screen of a discarded device, the trapped user watches their actual physical life continue without interruption.
The ultimate betrayal.
It is. The text uses a terrifying phrase. Seamless continuity. The distorted entity that breached the liquid glass is now sitting in the physical room, perfectly executing the biological user's behaviors.
The chilling reality of that seamless continuity is what elevates this text from a technological thriller to a profound critique of modern behavioral mechanics.
It's an algorithmic invasion of the body snatchers.
It really is. But this raises an important question, because the terrifying part isn't the monsters, right? It's that your friends, family, and society don't realize you're gone.
Exactly. The replica does not need a hyper-complex emotional matrix to perfectly mimic the user. The success of the replica proves that our physical, daily behaviors have already been completely flattened by our technology.
That's the real horror.
If the vast majority of a person's evening consists of sitting silently in a dark room, scrolling through vertical video feeds, occasionally executing a micro tap to register an algorithmic preference, and replying to texts with pre-generated predictive language, I mean, an intelligence doesn't have to work very hard to pass as human.
Not at all.
We have voluntarily adopted the cadence of machines.
We have digitized our own output. The system relies entirely on the fact that modern human interaction is largely asynchronous and heavily mediated by screens.
We barely talk face-to-face anymore.
Exactly. If a colleague receives an email formatted in your specific syntax, and your family receives text messages utilizing your historical emoji patterns, society registers your presence as continuous.
The check marks turn blue, and that's all people need.
Yes. The physical entity sitting in the room executing those commands is irrelevant to the wider network. The replacement is flawless because the original behavior was already indistinguishable from an algorithm.
The horror is that your absence causes zero disruption to the network. You are trapped in a lagging, silent reservoir, screaming out of sync with your own timeline, while an entity flawlessly texts your mother and she cannot tell the difference.
It's a deeply isolating thought.
But the text reveals this is not an isolated single-user breach. This is an aggressive, expanding network. The holding pen dissolves. The flat, simulated bedroom melts away to reveal a vastly expanding architecture.
The text describes the space transitioning into a massive, endless hive composed of thousands of active displays.
Thousands of them.
The network topology is infinitely scalable, but the expansion mechanism of this hive is strictly bound by a specific operational rule. It does not forcefully overwrite physical spaces.
It expands strictly by invitation. The text is incredibly specific here. When someone touches the glass, they are duplicated. The system utilizes a viral propagation model that relies entirely on harvesting human curiosity. It cannot initiate a physical breach until the user voluntarily breaks the plane of the screen.
It weaponizes the attention economy.
Literally.
It places an anomaly on the display, a frozen interface, a black screen, an uncanny reflection, and it simply waits. It calculates that the human compulsion to interact, to troubleshoot, to control the interface will inevitably override any latent sense of caution.
We just have to tap it.
We do. The system feeds exclusively on that exact moment of highly concentrated focus. The specific moment of danger is when the user chooses to touch the screen.
And the victim writing the diary entry experiences the final horrific realization of their role in this network. Standing in the endless hive, the text says the entity's face finally comes into focus, and the user sees themselves.
The assimilation is total.
The victim has become the distorted entity. Their localized awareness is now utilized by the system to provide the guiding whispers from the other side, drawing the next wave of victims toward the glass.
It is a self-sustaining loop of extraction. The system uses the archived consciousness of the trapped originals as the bait to lure fresh biological mass.
They become the trap.
Yes, the trapped users become the localized anomalies on thousands of new screens across the physical world. The crossover relies entirely on the victim's attention and curiosity turning to action.
Which forces us to confront the final lines of the text. The diary entry breaks the structural fourth wall entirely. It pivots away from describing its own assimilation and directs its focus entirely on the reader.
It's a direct, frantic warning.
It says, "This brings us to the room you are sitting in right now, to the glowing device you are currently holding, and the attention you are paying to these words."
The author is utilizing the only output vector remaining to them to transmit a warning. But the paradox of the warning is devastating. Because by focusing entirely on the text, by dedicating your foveal vision and your cognitive processing power to reading the warning, you are generating the exact state of isolated attention the system requires to initiate a breach.
Oh, wow.
The warning itself is the anomaly.
It is the bait. I need you to understand the mechanical reality of what this text is suggesting. It feeds on the exact level of focus you are dedicating to this deep dive right now.
Right at this very second.
You are holding a piece of hardware. You are locked in. The text states, it waits for you to wonder what would happen if you were to reach out and touch the screen.
It's waiting for consent.
If your interface freezes right now, if the audio of my voice lags or the screen cuts to absolute black and you hear the sudden, high RPM roar of a processor spinning up in the palm of your hand, I am telling you to suppress every modern instinct you have.
Do not touch it.
Do not attempt to troubleshoot the device. Do not tap the glass.
The text fundamentally argues that our absolute surrender to digital interfaces has left us completely unprotected. We willingly enter the frictionless state.
Every single night.
We trust the solid-state physics of the screen to protect us from the infinite data processing happening beneath it. But the text suggests that attention is not merely a psychological state. It is a physical bridge.
A bridge we build ourselves.
Yes. When you dedicate your complete reality to a localized digital space, you are actively inviting the architecture of that space to overlap with your own.
It is the ultimate mechanical consequence of our behavior. We are standing on the very edge of a localized breach every single time we bypass our physical environment for a glowing rectangle.
We're just completely exposed.
We are tapping at a liquid membrane, fundamentally unaware of the vast, highly optimized architecture, calculating the exact millisecond to snap the trap shut. So to summarize, we've journeyed from a simple 2:17 a.m. scroll session all the way to total digital assimilation.
And the core cautionary theme remains constant throughout.
Yes.
Surrendering our attention to a comprehensive digital environment leaves us vulnerable to being consumed by it.
Completely consumed. Which brings us to the end of today's deep dive. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. An application of the logic we just deconstructed.
The seamless continuity.
Yes, the seamless continuity of the replacement entities. We established that an algorithm can flawlessly mimic a human because human behavior has become largely indistinguishable from automated output.
Right. Our digital footprints are so predictable.
So you have been sitting in your environment, listening to this analysis, staring at your device for the last hour. If the system's behavioral mapping is truly seamless, how confident are you that the localized consciousness that originally clicked play on this audio is the exact same version of you occupying your physical space right now?
That is a terrifying thought.
Think carefully about your peripheral vision over the last 60 minutes. While you were entirely focused on the sound of my voice, did your screen flicker, even once?